If you want to improve your rural community or improve your local community, donating money to the nonprofit is a good thing and you should do it. But spending a couple of dollars extra to shop with the local store rather than Amazon, that is a form of charitable giving and something that all of us should think about.
Hello, one and all, and welcome back to The Real Impact. You know by now, if you didn't know before, you do now that we are the podcast that works hard to connect the dots between policy and rural everything. If we've not met yet, my name is Michelle Rathman. Thank you for joining us. As always, I'm extremely appreciative for your time and for you joining us for these dot connecting conversations. As we say, we know they are not light subjects most of the time, but at the end of each episode, we do hope that what we've shared has enlightened you at least just a little bit. That's our job here. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you that today I will be kicking off with an excerpt that I read in an open letter. And it inspired me even more to invite my guest to the show today. But before I introduce that guest, I do want to share again with you a little bit of that open letter. And it was written to Brooke L. Rollins, the new Secretary of Agriculture at the United States Department of Agriculture. And then I'll tell you who wrote these words after I just share a little bit of that with you. So here it goes. It's just a piece of that letter. About midway down, it starts. The decline in farms has not only depopulated so much of rural America, it has also made our nation dangerously dependent on a handful of people, places, and corporations for our food supply. America's food is no longer grown on a regional scale, where people, communities, and regions have a level of self-sufficiency that is augmented by trade on a regional, state, national, or international level. Today, so much of our food, especially meat, grain, and produce, is grown in a very small number of places at very large scale, controlled by only a few firms. The supply chain failures of the COVID-19 pandemic exposed this brittle system. Subsequent shocks from the fires at packing plants to disease outbreaks solidified that we have built an unconscionable risk into our food system. A country as bountiful as our own should never be subjected to food shortages. Yet, when 20% of egg production is concentrated into a single company, Cal-Maine, and two European companies control 90% of the world's egg layer hens, a bird flu outbreak causes just that. It is not just eggs. The beef cartel, comprised of just four companies, Tyson, JBS, Cargill, and National Beef, controls 80 to 85% of beef processed in America. It should be further noted that 40% of that processing volume is in the hands of two Brazilian firms, JBS and National Beef's parent company, Marfrig. Four companies control 70% of the pork processing volume, and four companies control almost 2/3 of chicken processing. The list goes on. The consolidation of food companies has further contributed to the decline in farms. Buyers with disproportionate market power can make enormous demands of growers to meet their standards and scale. Or, as dairy farmers have experienced time and again, powerful buyers can simply refuse to purchase from growers deemed too small to suit them. Here's the worst part. The increase in size is not good for anybody except large corporations. Dear listeners, that is just scratching the surface of this, what I consider to be a quite eloquent, thorough, and brilliant writing by my guest, and you're going to meet him in just a moment, James Decker. Now, I have been spending a lot of time lately on Substack. I'm working on building our content there down the road. But I read James Decker, his work. He is the mayor of Stamford, Texas, also a lawyer and a writer, and he calls himself a rural fanatic. I would say after reading and listening to him, that is true. And you can also find his essays, as I said, on Substack under the name West of 98. Again, we always make sure that we connect those links to our resource page. And you can also listen to him as he co-hosts a podcast called The Rural Church and State. Been, again, really enjoying listening and reading his work. But before you do any of that, you're going to hear him right here next. So it is that time when I ask you to get yourself in your podcast frame, listening of mine, and hear my conversation with James Decker. I am so ready for this. I hope you are too. So let's go. Hey, James Decker, it's great to have you here with us on The Rural Impact. Thank you and welcome.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, as our folks heard us talk about in the introduction, I've been following you. You were recommended to me from, I think, the Save Our Town folks.
Yeah, Becky McCrae.
Yeah. And so I just saw something on LinkedIn, and that's where I find so many great. I know you also have a lot of social media people that you talk to as well. I know because I've read your blog, so I get that. I do want to start off by sharing with our listeners, because this is a different platform than maybe what most are used to for the followers who you've been able to amass on your Substack and so forth. Tell us a little bit about your work, who you are, because podcasting and writing is not your, in quote, day job. So give us a well-rounded picture of who James Decker is. James M. Decker, by the way.
That's right. So I was raised here in Stamford, Texas, which is a town of about 3,000 on the rolling plains of West Texas. Dry land, cotton, cattle, wheat farming town. It was kind of the center where the railroads met, kind of the regional trading center that was founded in 1900. Grew up here. I went to high school, went to college, went to law school, and came right back to Stanford and opened up my law practice, where I've been practicing law on the downtown square for the last since 2009. So just over 15 years. And one of the things in the process of that was, I was raised to be involved in the community. My parents were involved in many ways. My dad was on the city council when I was a child. I went to a lot of city council meetings when I was a kid for fun, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And so just being involved in the community as a volunteer, as a leader, et cetera, is just, not just something that I think you should, think would be fun to do if you have time. It's an obligation and a responsibility in my mind. So I knew I would always be involved in the community somehow. I ran for city council a few years after I got back to town. I got elected and then served a couple of terms on the city council, and then I got elected mayor in 2018. And as part of running for mayor, I knew that it was important to put ideas out in the world, to give people my thoughts, to understand, that what I believed, why I believed it, and how it could impact our community. And it started with just kind of doing some short little, 3 or 4 paragraph essays on Facebook. And then it kind of mushroomed from there into a Substack, while also, copy and pasting onto Facebook. And now we just link it everywhere else, and it goes directly to my Substack. Just talking about rural issues, rural revitalization, being a leader in a community, the local economy, local government, kind of all of those things. Yeah. Basically the things that are all on my mind.
Yeah. And I add on the minds of many as well. What I like about the way that you write and how you share it, I don't know how you find the time sometimes to do all the writing that you do, is that what you talk about rural revitalization and so forth, it's a different perspective than so many of the circles that I've been familiar with when we talk about really, really big, huge things that require a lot of muscle, and not just the civic muscle that you're talking about locally. But I like the fact that you boil it down to bite sizes that really people can do and help transform their own community. But I do want to say, even though you write about these really great, the way that you write about it, these nuggets, if you will, you also took on a big bite, if you will, by writing a special letter to USDA Secretary Rollins. And the title of that was, "I Believe in the Future of Agriculture." And I got it right. And it was a really well-written piece, well organized. I know it's been shared and read far and wide. But from it, I thought what we could do is, because then I have a lot of other places I want to go, but you have kind of a must-do list on how we enact transformative change where rural is concerned. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind just taking a stab at going through some of those with me, because the first one, and this is, on so many of our minds right now, you say that we must make farming affordable again. I shared with you before we went on, my grandparents were farmers and so forth, and that is no longer the family business, as this case for so many of us, north, south, east, where you are and so forth. So let's start with that one.
Well, so Ultimately, you cannot revitalize the rural economy without dealing with the question of agriculture.
Mhm.
There are lots of things that can improve the rural economy. Tourism, technology, remote work. There's a lot of those things, but ultimately, you're just those things are dependent on basically the urban communities, suburban communities, and what they will give us, what works, et cetera. Remote work is a great thing, and it sounds great. And then the federal government decides to start, closing out remote work for federal jobs, and then putting some sort of dependence, putting all your eggs in any basket is a dangerous game.
Mhm.
But the rural economy is based historically on feeding and clothing our people, and our communities, our regions, and ultimately our nation, and then the world. And we can talk about the whole farmers feed the world thing in a minute. But
Yep.
we have certain resources, and that's land, and grasslands, the ability to farm, the ability to raise livestock. Those are our resources in these rural communities, and we've got to figure out how to deal with the loss of farmers, the decline in agriculture, because the decline in the rural community is entirely parallel with um, the decline in the agricultural economy and the loss of small farms.
Yes.
And over the years, I've thought a lot about this, and the reality is, I mean, you can try to shift the rural economy to some wholesale other change, economy. But what's going to happen is people are going to say, "Well, I'm going to do that. I might as well just move to move to a big city or a suburb where I can do that. You do a better version of that and cheaper and closer to all the amenities." People live in rural communities in rural America because they want to, because of the roots that they have, or the quality of life that it inspires, and it provides. And so we have to make that workable so that those people can and do stay on the land and stay and have careers that go with it, because not everybody in a town like Stanford is a farmer, but 100% of the people who have a job in Stanford are connected with agriculture in some way. If they're a
Mhm.
teacher, if they are, work at the auto parts store, if they work at Walmart, if they, whatever the case may be, their salary depends to some degree on agriculture flowing through the community indirectly. So if agriculture fails, Stanford and places like it will fail. So that's what we got to deal with. And we can talk about those. We can talk about some of those bullet points. But I'm a firm believer that if you lay out a bunch of problems and no solutions, then that's called whining.
Yeah, I love
And
it. Mhm.
and that's something that I'm very cognizant of locally. When people come to me with local problems to talk about, and I say, "Well, what's your solution?" And they don't have a solution. I was like, "Hey,
Mhm.
like, I appreciate you bringing the problems to me, but let's talk about what the ideas are." So I don't bring when I took it upon myself to write a letter to the Secretary of Agriculture to say, "Hey, here are the problems with rural America, and here are the problems with the last 70 years of agricultural policy." I knew I had to come back with a list of solutions and proposals that are could some of them could be enacted relatively quickly, and some of them are, frankly, transformative things that may not be fully enacted in my lifetime. And it may be a lifetime struggle for me to get people to listen to me, and that's
Mm.
okay.
Well,
But
I mean, it's so practical. I mean, you said, and the second one is we need to reform crop insurance and safety net programs to incentivize harvesting crops rather than forcing farmers to destroy marginal crops to appease their lenders and other creditors. That's pretty darn simple. It was born out of policy. It could be taken away, as they say. And then you talk about encouraging both proven and experimental farming techniques to increase soil health. While we're on the topic of healthy food, there are a lot of things that can be done there. I wonder, have you heard any response? I mean, other than people saying, yes, this needs to be said, and hey, I didn't realize that until you actually penned it out for me.
you know, in a lot of ways, I'm not a genius. I'm not coming up with these ideas on myself,
Right.
out of nowhere. I'm giving a voice to ideas that farmers are talking about, and that
Hmm.
people that run farm organizations are talking about. Because this is stuff here that the crop insurance question. It's stuff that I hear from farmers and folks. My wife, runs a cotton growers organization within the region, and it's something that she and her guys are frustrated about, because in many ways, crop insurance is is not it's not a path to prosperity of the farmer. It's a insurance to ensure that the bankers and the chemical and fertilizer and seed companies will let you keep going for another year. And so they get faced with those tough choices of what's the best way for me to pay down my loan enough so that they will let me let me continue to operate again and finance me for another year, because the system incentivizes, that they have to deal with that. I hear about the cover crops and the multi-cropping systems, and guys that I follow on social media, people that I know in real life, and talk about the struggle of crop insurance won't let you do certain things. Suspicious landlords that maybe they want to see some proof before you go on to some wild experimental cropping system on their property, because it's very foreign to them. The backing of federal ag policy to encourage, incentivize those things would honestly give the farmers the confidence and just the boost financially and with the security that they need to try things that would be a net better for the environment, for their farms, for soil health, and the bottom line to the farmer and the federal government, frankly.
Yeah, it really is it is an investment in our agriculture future. And it just feels like we're going to have some more tough conversations that we have to have about this as we sit here and wait for things to, finally get to a point where we can have, really robust, serious conversation about the Farm Bill and so forth. I mean, all of these things are policy related, and I applaud you for, taking it upon yourself to write the piece. And I encourage our listeners, if you have not read it, I really encourage you to read it and become familiar with, these really basic and logical premises that you've put out there.
Well, thank you. And that's the thing is, the old definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's one of the great frustration of farm policy to me is we've continued to do the same thing over and over again for decades, and it continues to lose. We continue to lose farmers of all sizes, and the ones who remain get bigger and get more efficient because that's the only way they can survive, and barely do so. And as corporations consolidate and have more market power, it becomes even tougher. And this is not a criticism of the folks who work in policy on the day-to-day basis. These folks are trying to fix the symptoms of the problem. In finding some way to tweak it and make it better and in a dysfunctional political environment. But it's the undercarriage that's, in my opinion, is broken, that needs a complete rehab that we've got to talk about.
And James, before we take a really quick break, I will just say, as I'm watching the Department of Health and Human Services and the intersection now that, of course, that they have with USDA and the healthy food movement and what have you, decimating those agencies and taking the on the ground folks, the people that you're talking about on the ground, working in the state at the USDA, rural development, whatnot. I mean, say what you want. Yeah, it's so entangled, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of intelligence that needs to be maintained and work and build what we have. I don't know how that's possible, but I do believe that it is possible.
Absolutely. And just breaking things to pick up the pieces doesn't necessarily make things better.
No, not at all. All right. Before we transition to a few more places, and I've got plenty I'd like to go, I really do need to take a quick break because we do have an important message to share from our partners at the American Heart Association talking about health. This is really an important one, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. This episode of the Rural Impact Podcast is sponsored by the American Heart Association. American Heart Association believes that everyone, no matter where they live, deserves access to high-quality care. That's why they created the Rural Healthcare Outcomes Accelerator, a program designed to help rural hospitals improve cardiovascular care and patient outcomes. The Rural Accelerator provides no-cost access to quality improvement programs, data-driven insights, learning collaboratives, recognition opportunities, and expert-guided education to support 1,000 rural hospitals across the country in delivering evidence-based care. Now, there's still room, so rural hospitals play a critical role in their communities. Enroll today and join the movement to improve rural heart health. To do that, just visit www.heart.org/Rural Accelerator. Again, that's heart.org/Rural Accelerator, and you can learn more. Now, let's rejoin our dot connecting conversation. Okay, James, we're back. And now that we're halfway done with the month of April 2025, I'd like to go back to a conversation I heard on your podcast, which is, I love the conversation, Rural Church and State. It was something that was done in October 2024. And I was waiting because you guys were talking about your predictions. All right, you were with the pastor, and I love the way he said he can't even say rural. You were talking with the pastor and you're like, you're going to give your prediction. And then poof, out of your mouth comes,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. And so I wonder if what does that mean to you then and now? Has anything changed? Or I'm just curious.
So no, I stand by that. The problems, one thing I have, and I try to do a best I can of staying out of partisan politics because I just kind of think that it's fundamentally all broken. And we've got this action hero idea of the presidency that we just elect the right person that's going to come in, the person's going to come in and fix everything. And we've been doing that for, multiple elections now, and none of it has ever happened. So maybe we ought to consider the fact that the action hero presidency is not the answer. And that we've got to figure out that no matter who the president is, no matter who they appoint to these offices, the things that need to change to improve rural America, our culture, our world in general, are much deeper, and they take all of us inspiring each other, doing our own work. Once upon a time, I had the vision, everybody says, you want to change the world. And the reality is you need to change your world around you. And in doing that, that inspires other people to do the same. And that's how we change the world. There was a great Wendell Berry quote from 2016 where he was asked about how he felt about the outcome of the election. And he said, I'm still on the losing side. That's where I've taken up my residence. And if Hillary Clinton had won, I'd still be on the losing side. The conditions that have led to the decline of rural America have been in place since the end of World War II. And no matter who is in the White House, it's on we in rural America are on the losing side, and we just have to work every day to do our part and right the ship. And there's another Wendell Berry line from my favorite poem of his, the Mad Farmer Manifesto Liberation Front, that says plant sequoias. And it said, and the purpose of that is to do good work for the right reasons, no matter if you ever see the results of it.
Yes.
And that to me is far more important, inspiring others and to do good work and doing good work myself, whether I see it in my lifetime or not. That's far more important than who gets in the White House.
Yeah. Wow. And I wanted to have that conversation because I kind of knew what you would say, but it was good to hear you say it out loud. I think it's a great segue because another piece that you wrote, as a person who does do a lot of travel around rural places all over this country, always left feeling many ranges of emotions. You can really see the difference when you are and feel the difference. Moreover, when you're in a place where there is a lot of civic engagement, when there is I work with hospitals, so often they are the gatherers and the conveners of everything around health and beautification and whatnot. But I want to read something really quick and then have you talk about it a little bit now that you actually brought this up. In this piece of the poor town and the dirty town.
Yes.
You wrote, as rural communities declined in post-World War II economic order, they did not just lose the population and jobs, they lost investment, they lost wealth, they lost their tax base. There were fewer dollars to be used on keeping the community maintained, much less improving it. As the dollar stretched ever thinner and hems and cuffs of the community became frayed and tattered, a small pot of money can only go so far, and a shrinking pool of volunteers only has so many hours in the day. A town that lacks the resources to improve its situation may well be called a poor town. And yet, none of these challenges, not even a reshaped global economic order, can be viewed as an acceptable excuse to be a dirty town. And as a mayor of a town that has seen its share of population, decline, talk a little bit about that piece, because I think it speaks volumes to a community having its own agency and looking more inward.
Absolutely. And we can only control what is within our control. But by golly, we've got to control what's in our control.
Mhm.
This has been probably, man, 15 years ago, maybe. A friend that was driving through town, was coming through going back to his hometown, a bigger city. And city government was not doing a good job at that time of, weeding the sidewalks on the main thoroughfares and stuff like that. Just those little things, those little bits of pride. And he drove through and he called my father, and it got back to me, and it really stuck with me. And he said, "Man, does anybody live in Stamford? It looks like it's abandoned."
Yeah.
And that was that was just a guy that was just passing through, and that was his perception, just looking at the main sidewalks, and that makes a difference. You got to show a little bit of pride. There are certain things like, great example, playground equipment.
Mhm.
A new piece of playground equipment at a park might cost you 15 or 20,000 bucks, which is a drop in the bucket for even a mid-sized suburb to just write a check and move on. You spend that kind of money out of your park budget in a city that has a $4.5 million budget, and Stanford is relatively large in our city budget compared to cities, a lot of other rural communities in this part of the world that may only have 1 million or 2 million, but $4.5 million in a budget, that piece of playground equipment, that will be your entire budget for new capital improvements to the parks for the year.
For
You
the
can't just
year.
write a check. You got to make a plan to pay for that. So you can't just do that. But the existing swing set that the paint is peeling because nobody has painted it in 25 years, you can fix that. The weeds that are coming up in the sand underneath the play set, you can fix that. Control what's in your control, and it will make your place look prosperous. I think on the East Coast, there are houses on the East Coast that have been in existence twice as long as our town has existed. And they're not new. Not everything has to be new and gleaming and shining steel and concrete. But if it's taken care of, if the little stuff, the little maintenance is taken care of, then it'll last. It'll last. Things were built to last, and they will last for the ages. But taking care of things, it doesn't matter how old they are. It doesn't matter how limited your income into your community and your tax base is. Just show that you care, and it makes a huge difference to your people. Because the other thing is, if your government doesn't act like it cares, it's kind of hard to ask your citizens to care too. Back in those years ago, before city government was really taking a lot of pride in things, it was really hard to pursue code enforcement against your citizens for
Mhm.
high weeds or junk in their yards, or just kind of the ratty stuff that just makes, junk vehicles in their yard and that sort of thing. Because if the city's not taking care of its own details, it's really hard to ask your citizens to take care of theirs.
Mm. James, I did speak to a county official last year, and we had this conversation, and he said one of the challenges is exactly what you said, is that county members, what is it, city, county, whatever it might be, whatever the structure is, are not really super fans of going out there and enforcing, let alone having some of those ordinances. But I did appreciate you talking about it because, um, to your point, you can control what you can control. You can't control whether or not your hospital closes, so to speak, but you can
Right.
control, and that is a very sad story. Okay, I want to move on because, again, you're a list maker, which I really appreciated, but you do talk about revitalizing rural America will not happen with mere policy changes alone. Policy changes are important, but how we live with and relate to one another is essential. And that's super words to live by, to be sure. At the same time, though, you also talk about the fact that some significant priorities that require policy, rural broadband, economic development, healthcare is another priority for you. And we'll go on from there. But let's talk a little bit about the juxtaposition of those two things, because without good policy, rural broadband is kind of challenging because of the way it's built.
Absolutely. And this is and I when I write, I try to speak both to, the local individual folks that are just trying to get through life, and I speak to policymakers who will hopefully listen to the things I
Mhm.
say. And one of the things that we see in rural communities is everybody wants, more local businesses, more local recreation options. But you got to support the people who are here. If nobody shops local, and Stanford, we do better than some on this. There's some other communities that I've talked to that just really just people will just at the drop of a hat go to another town.
We call it bypass.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Then it just kills their retail economy.
Mm-hmm.
But if you won't shop local, if you'll undercut your local business because Amazon can get it a day cheaper for half price, well, then you can't expect local business to exist, much less new business to come in.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that I really think that Wendell Berry's writing really speaks to me is how he bases everything around the two greatest commandments, from a Christian perspective: love God and love your neighbor, because everything goes back to that. Loving God requires everything. It didn't just, that's just not going to church. That's taking care of our natural resources and stewarding creation in a healthy way. Loving your neighbor isn't just saying hi to him when you see him on the street. It's helping him out, trading work with him if needed. It's going to shop at his business, even if it costs you a little more. I've got a friend of mine he lives in England, named Haddon Turner. He's a great agrarian writer, a young guy, younger than me, much better writer than I am. And he's a deep Wendell Berry inspired thinker,
Mm-hmm.
just like I am. And he's written how buying well is a form of charity. That if you want to improve your rural community or improve your local community, donating money to the nonprofit is a good thing, and you should do it to your local, baseball organization or church or whatever the group may be. But spending a couple of dollars extra to shop with the local store rather than Amazon, that is a form of charitable giving, and something that all of us should think about.
Oh, I'm going to put it out there. I profess there is no such thing in our home. We have gone completely away, and it is all local. As local as I could possibly be. Because I really do believe in that. And I walked around my own little town, downtown this weekend and did, local, a lot more window shopping than shopping right now. But at the end of the day, I agree with that. And unfortunately, you can't do that again. You can't do that in healthcare. You can't do that in education. And before we kind of close out, because this is two things, because you do talk about the fact that a priority is education. And then you kind of wrote a piece that talked about, or you were interviewed, I believe, and they were talking about the waivers. And we've had a lot of conversation, James, on this podcast about the importance of investing in rural schools. I mean, if nothing else, thinking about all the social drivers, but education. So talk a little bit about what's going on. And I think it's nice for people to hear a local perspective, from a guy who's a mayor of a town, and how you feel about investing in local schools in a way that's accessible to the children.
Absolutely. In larger cities, a school and a community can almost, operate completely separately from each other. In a rural community, as the school goes, so goes the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean, I mean from a larger perspective. When the school closes, it's largely the death knell for the community. And I can name towns in this area that their school closed and now they're just a shell and, not much more than a ghost town. But also, if your kids are succeeding in activities, whether it's football or FFA or band or whatever, that just raises the level of enthusiasm within our community. Stanford went to state in football, went to the state championship game in December, and it was, it was a
Big
great
deal.
It was his first time in a decade. We've won several state championships, but it was cool. It was a whole thing. I dyed my hair blue. The community loved that. But there were people who don't even like football made a comment to me that they could just feel the mood was different in town because of that. But the other thing of that is, if the community supports its kids and wants to see them do well and encourage them, that makes those kids think twice about the whole "I'm going to leave and never come back" attitude. Maybe some of them stay here, get a good job here. Maybe some of them go to college and then come back here to teach or do something else. We've got several good young teachers in our community that went K through 12 through this school. And I'm not asking for special treatment from our legislators and our state officials. I would just like some recognition and acknowledgement that we exist, because, to some degree, at best, honestly, them ignoring us is sometimes the best thing that we get out of them, because otherwise they're not actively making life worse. But when it comes to education, they like to put us in a box with all public education. Fine. I understand public education has things that need to be fixed. Totally agree. But just recognize that rural schools are a very different animal than any other school in America.
Absolutely. Just a previous episode, We had a conversation about the fact that in the state of Missouri, rural kids are going to school 4 days a week because they don't have the money to put the lights on. And that's just wrong with a capital WORNG, if you ask me.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Okay. My last question to you, James, is, again, for folks who are not familiar with your writing, don't sell yourself short. You've got a good thing going on. But I would like to talk to you about the fact I see in your writing advocacy just by the way that you present information. You don't have to be partisan. I mean, you could just. I like the connecting the dots between facts and reality and the things that matter. So I think we have that in common. What are some of a tip or a piece of advice that you have for those who don't want to be political and are looking for a way to advocate that doesn't get them, in a pickle, getting into a political conversation?
Well, avoiding conversations with a politician is probably out the window on this. But if you truly want to advocate, talk to your elected officials. I know folks, when things get hot and bothered, people will get a script and they'll call that they get from some advocacy group, and they'll call and, leave a voicemail on a congressman's number. And who knows, honestly, you got young staffers are having to listen to those and deal with them.
Yeah.
If you're a congressman, if you're a state representative, whoever it is, if they have a town hall, if they have an event, if they have a fundraiser, like a meet and greet on their campaign, go talk to them. Say, here's who I am. Here's what matters to me. Here's what, here's what I care about. If I can ever help you, let me know. For the most part, people who are elected love people who genuinely want to help. That doesn't mean they're going to take everything that you tell them and enact it into policy. But a good staffer is going to, take your number down and call you if there's something that they know that was relevant that you mentioned to them, and write them periodically. Send them a letter, send them a text. Call their office, tell them, hey, I talked to you a while back, sent you an email. I'd love to continue giving my input. Just keep talking. It's a lot. That's a lot of energy for no guarantee of return, but it matters. If you're involved in some sort of organization, whether it's, or, some group that does some sort of advocacy, whether it's in agriculture or otherwise, go to those meetings, speak up, give your opinions. I get frustrated with some of those groups because, sometimes they have their own agenda and you feel like you're perpetuating their agenda and you don't know if they're listening to you or not. But the way you guarantee that they don't listen to you is you don't show up.
Yes.
Show up and get involved and make an impact, and volunteer to serve on a committee, volunteer to go take a trip to Austin or DC or wherever and talk to folks. Is this easy? No, but it's important.
And it's ours to have, or
Right.
to give, or ours to give away.
Exactly.
And so it's rewarding, when you do land one, it is rewarding. And so clearly you've got a few that have landed. James M. Decker, you are welcome to come back and join us anytime. Perhaps you and I could come up with a shtick someday, and it would make sense to more people than just me in my head, and maybe you as well.
Hey, I'd be glad to come back anytime.
Yeah, it'd be great. And so we're going to make sure we have links to West of 98 and all your other great stuff. And please do subscribe to James, and we'll be in touch with you soon. Thanks so much for joining us on The Rural Impact.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle.
My thanks to James Decker for joining me. Again, I encourage you to follow his work on Substack and watch for new podcast episodes that he brings us. I invited him to come back. I think it'd be fun for us to do something together. Fun is something I think we could all use a little bit more of these days. I know I sure can. But in the end of the day, I do want to remind you, if you are not yet a subscriber, we sure do appreciate when you do that. Please do that anywhere where you like to listen to your podcast. You can find us pretty much everywhere. And also, when you go to our website, theruralimpact.com, it takes less than 2 seconds. Hit that subscribe button, and we will make sure that you receive our post-series and special episode e-blasts, where we also put all sorts of great resources, and really invite you to become part of our community and join our conversation. To Sarah Staub and Bria Corsaro, thank you as always for all your hard work behind the scenes. And until we meet again, I say it all the time, and I really mean it. Please, in these times especially, take good care of yourself and, to the best of your ability, all those around you. We'll see you again on a new episode of The Rural Impact.